introduced our second main speaker, Alessio Bertolini. Alessio's from Fairwork. He will do, let's say, Alessio do a max 10 minutes, maybe even shorter. The shorter, the better always, because then the story comes across much better. You can do that. I give you the floor now. Good luck, and explain what is Fairwork, because you know that.
Yeah, I'll just start sharing my screen. I hope you can see it. Is that all right? Can you all see it?
Yes, it's all fine.
Cool, perfect. So I'm Alessio Bertolini. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Fairwork project at the University of Oxford, and I will present very briefly the Fairwork project for those of you who are not familiar with it, and then I will specifically look at the kind of how we evaluate fair pay and what are the problems that these workers face when it comes to fair pay. So for those of you who don't know the Fairwork project, what we do is basically evaluating the working conditions of different labor platforms across the world. And we do this based on our five Fairwork principles, which are fair pay, fair conditions, fair contract, fair management, and fair representation. And our research uses a kind of mixed qualitative method approach. First of all, we do desk research where we gather initial information about platforms, and then we complement this with worker interviews. We interview around 6 to 10 workers per platforms. And finally, we also have multiple interviews with managers, and we ask for further evidence directly from the platforms. And the final scores are decided collectively by the Fairwork team, and they're peer reviewed by each country team, the Oxford team, and by the central team. And how do we expect scores? The arithmetics is very simple. I think there is some noise.
Yes. So take care, Alessio. Try to speak more closer to your microphone. And okay. I'm sure Akash will make sure that the noise from maybe somewhere else that will be taken out. So go ahead.
Okay, no worries.
Yeah.
Now we're just saying the arithmetics to which we assign a score to the company based on our Fairwork principle is very simple. We have a basic point if a basic condition is met, and a more advanced point if a more advanced threshold or a more advanced condition is met. There's 5 principles, 2 points per principle. Each platform can get from 0 to 10 score. And here you have 2 examples from Germany, from 2 ride-hailing platforms in Germany. And as you can see, there is a wide variation in the scores. On the one hand, we have Clever Shuttle, which is a small, ecologically friendly ride-hailing platform operating in a number of German cities. And you can see they got a 9 out of 10 in our score. And then you have Uber. Uber doesn't need a presentation, I guess, but they only got 1 out of 10 in our score last year. When it comes to evaluating fair pay, so how do we evaluate fair pay in our project? So we want to see that each worker, irrespective of their employment classification, of course, I will go back to the issue of employment classification in a bit, should earn a decent income in their home jurisdiction after taking into account of work related. In our basic things, we want the worker to be paid at least the local or the equivalent of a local minimum wage after cost. And in the more advanced threshold, we want the worker to be paid at least the local living wage after. So what are the problems with work? Well, this has already been said multiple times by several ladies.
Alessio, we're losing you more and more. So
I don't know. I'm trying to be closer.
Well, try and eat your microphone. That might be the best.
I'll try my best. Yeah. And so basically, in our Fairwork project, the way we calculate the working time is not just the time spent on the kit, as already previously mentioned, but we also include waiting time, which is a very substantial amount of when the worker spent working, as Valeria was previously mentioning. Also, we include transport in between jobs or in between tasks. And finally, we also include login time. So, of course, any time that the worker is spending logged in into the platform is taken into account for the consideration of work time. And of course, there is the issue of multi-apping. Many of these platforms don't want to pay the worker their login time because they say the worker is connected to other platforms, might be working for other platforms, so they don't want to pay the worker for their login time. However, there is some interesting solutions to the issue of multi-apping. For example, the Italian collective agreement says that basically if the worker is accepting at least one task in the hour in which they are connected, then they should be paid minimum wage. There might be other solutions. There are some technological solutions that might share the cost of the minimum wage between different platforms in a specific amount of time, and there might be many more. Another issue when it comes to platform work, as again already been mentioned before, so I won't spend too much time on it, but because many of these workers operate on a self-employed or independent contractor model, most of the costs are actually not paid by the platform, but are actually borne by the worker. And in our project, we really try to be as encompassing as possible when it comes to working costs. We include the fuel in case the worker uses a motorized vehicle. We also include the repairs and maintenance, both for the vehicle, but also any working tool they might be using. We also include work equipment, including health and safety equipment, for example, PPE or masks or helmets, lights, and so on and so forth. Also, the insurance, if the worker has to have any health and safety insurance or any accident insurance for carrying out the job. Also, of course, vehicle rental. Sometimes renting a vehicle, especially, for example, if you think about the ride-hailing, would be a very substantial share of the cost the worker might incur in. And of course, finally, but not less important, also internet. Workers are connected to an app. They sometimes consume a lot of data in using these apps. So internet charges on the phone or on the computer should also be included. But of course, the way these costs are calculated are also very crucial. Many of these platforms claim to include the cost in their pay, but actually the way they calculate the cost is utter underestimation of the cost that the worker is really incurring. And in this case, Wage Indicator provides kind of a safer and more evidence-based tool to calculate the labor cost.
And Alessio, there is still a bit of issue with the, let's say, with the microphone. So keep the microphone as stable as you can, and your connection is not so strong. So maybe switch off your video, and then we go ahead. We try to make it as good as possible.
Yeah, I don't think I can switch off my video, otherwise you won't see my presentation, I'm afraid. But yeah, well, I'll try to speak as close as possible to the microphone.
Yeah.
So, and another issue which I don't think has been mentioned that much in the previous is the issue of payment delays. So, for example, in the cloud work or freelance platforms, online freelance platforms, many platforms not take responsibility for the non-payment by clients. If the client or the customer is not satisfied with the work, they are generally quite free to not pay the worker. And because of the power asymmetry between the platform and the worker is very limited to contest the non-payment. And even when the workers have the ability to contest payment, platforms can be biased towards customers in deciding whether to pay the worker or not. And more generally, across both the geo-tethered and the online forms of platform work, payments are often not required. Sometimes they use very complex algorithms. So, for example, if a worker is delivering a good, they might not know whether they're paid by time, they're paid by distance, but are paid by any other, or if any other variable is taken into consideration. So it's very difficult for the worker to understand whether they are being rightly paid and correctly paid or. And in the second part of this presentation, we actually look at the threshold fees. Because of course, once we calculate pay, we need to see whether they meet our. And unfortunately, minimum wage is often really low minimum. In many countries, the minimum wage is extremely low. Sometimes it hasn't been paid for years or sometimes for more than a decade. And sometimes it's simply being set for political or economic reason, even below the poverty level. So even when the platforms are able to actually pay the worker the minimum wage or the equivalent of a minimum wage, they might still be paying the worker very little. And And another issue is also the fact that even platforms that claim to be working, to be paying the workers above the minimum wage, they only take into account of some of the costs. For example, the rental of the vehicle is generally not considered, even by platforms that are considering costs, is not considered as part of the usual. So even in these cases, the workers might actually be paid below the minimum wage once all the costs are paid. So is living wage a solution? Well, we think that living wage is a more accurate measure of fair pay. That's why when we revised our principles last year, we introduced the concept of a living wage. However, we need to consider that the living wage should really take into account of all the living costs that an individual might incur, and also should be adapted to the local and individual circumstances. When I say local, if you think about energy costs or transport costs, may vary sometimes quite substantially, even within the same country or within the same region. Also individual circumstances, because for example, what could be considered a living wage for a single individual and not be considered a living wage for example, a lone mother with 3 kids. And of course, they should also, the living wage as the minimum wages should be regularly updated, especially in countries that suffer from very high inflation. Unless the living wage is annually, sometimes even monthly updated, it won't be an accurate measure of the actual living cost of going beyond the living wage, and this is a topic that's already been mentioned in the previous panel, even if the workers is paid the living wage after cost, they might still not be earning enough. They might be having too few gigs or too few tasks. They might be able to carry out. But also the unpredictability of income, not knowing how many jobs they will be able to get in a specific time, and the irregularity of income. We've seen before that workers might have different income opportunities that vary substantially, sometimes across months of the year, sometimes days of the week, or times of the day. We'll just conclude here saying that, like fighting precarity and insecurity in the platform economy, living wage is an important tool, but require more than just living wages. And I will just stop here. I hope I stayed into the 10 minutes.
Alessio, thanks a million. Well done. And I'm sure that in all the pitches which will come now, some small solutions are given for all the problems which we have heard so far. Meanwhile, any question for Alessio for Fairwork, keep on asking them in the chat box. We see that the chat box is nice and vivid. So we have a lovely, or we can multitask as we all like to do, or especially I would love to do. So keep on asking, keep on listening.